Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I get to talk with Kate Elliott, the author of The Witch Road, which is out this month. So thank you for being here, Kate.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Can I ask a question? Why the upper pen?
I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Oh, that's so good. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Okay.
Um, can you give folks a little rundown of what Witch Roads is about?
Oh, you're asking the hardest question first. I'm so bad at this. Some people are really glib about this, but I'm so bad at this. So I usually just go with the a version of the cover copy. It's a fantasy novel set in a what we call a secondary world, which is a world that isn't our world, and it's not an alt history, so it's a completely made up world. Um, the basic story is the main character is a deputy courier, which means she's a minor official in this big empire. And her job, she lives in the provinces, and her job is to walk the mail route. So this is a kind of pre-industrial civilization to walk the mail route up into the hills. So she like every month she walks for 2 weeks and she delivers mail and pays money. You know, people might have to pay a debt to someone somewhere else, and she carries. So she does all that and she's been doing this for 10 years. And then she gets caught up. Not, it's purely accidentally, but in some ways, it turns out to her advantage. She gets caught up the in palace intrigue. And she's not a driver of the intrigue. She's like the person who in many a story would be the collateral damage, right? The
Yes.
person who would be the spear carrier or who would get, you know, in a lot of stories, someone has to be killed and discarded to show that the bad guy is bad. So I wanted to tell a story about what happens with this smart person who lives an ordinary life and how what happens when they got caught up in this. Um, and then the other element is that there is a prince, but there's also another character. I guess it's not really a spoiler because it happens early. The prince is maybe not the prince. So that's all I'll say. And anyway, they go on a journey with a small group of people. So it's also a bit of an ensemble piece where you get to know everybody. And there's a mysterious errand, two mysterious errands. And um, and Ellen is there with her nephew who has his own reasons to be on this trip. He's just 17 and having to choose his path in life. And he's escaping from something that could totally upend his life. So there's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on. It makes me want to call you a maximalist almost because you pack so much in. There's so much information.
You know, I have to say this is kind of a short book with less stuff going on for me. I've written, for example, The Crown of Stars is an epic fantasy, 7-volume epic fantasy. All the books are chunky. There's a cast of thousands, multiple plot threads. I've also not quite done with a space opera trilogy based on it's like gender flipped Alexander the Great in space. And it's again, big books, hundreds of characters, multiple plot threads interweaving. So The Witch Roads is kind of me being simplified. I'm simplifying what I can also do and also love to do.
Okay. I was just impressed that you would name everything. Like there's a stream that goes through that Kem, the nephew, jumps over at one point and it's named. And I was like, whoa, you'd even name these little streams?
Well, the thing is, one of the things I'm trying to do with the book is that, I mean, you and I have read a lot of books. And a lot of fantasy and even science fiction often deals with people who are the highest levels of society. It might be they might be nobility, or they might just be the rulers. They might be oftentimes stories focus on rich people. And I wanted to tell a story about the ordinary people who live day to day, who know the land, who know what the name of the stream. They know about this intersection. They know that 20 years something happened here. They know all those things because they live there every day and because those things matter to them. There's a whole history of how people live there. I grew up in rural Oregon in farm country. And so, in a way, this is a little bit of my tribute to how much the world runs on the work of ordinary people who, a lot of times, our fiction treats as their lives as uninteresting, but actually, and them as uninteresting, but actually they're just as capable, just as interesting as anybody. So this is kind of my tribute to every day. But also there's a big adventure, right?
It's the best kind of everyday, big adventure.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I do notice that in books where they do focus on like lower caste people, usually those people are not lower caste by the end. They are very much like upper echelon of society. But it feels like Ellen in this book stays pretty level-headed. She stays the same level of like, I have an idea of who I am, and that's fine.
Yeah, so the second book isn't out yet. It's coming in November, so it is a duology. It is one story told over two volumes. I did I did try to make the first book, The Witch Rose, have kind of a pause point. One thing, there's kind of an emotional resolution on one of the plot lines so that people can say, okay, I can take a little break, and then the next book's coming in November. It's not too long to wait. I will say that Ellen is who she is. There's no surprise for her about anything. She's not secretly, it's not even a spoiler because it was never even part of my imagining,
And
you
I
know.
love that about her. Like she's
Yeah,
just so normal.
yeah, yeah. Well, in most ways.
Well, I mean, yes.
Have you seen the cover of the second book, The Nameless Land?
No, I haven't. I've only seen the first.
Okay, so search the cover of once you've read book one. Search for the cover of book two and then look at it really closely. It took me like three times looking at it before I spotted it.
Oh, I
So
love
I'll say no more.
I love
Don't
when
look at that cover if you haven't read book one, though. I mean, don't look at it closely if you haven't read book one. It's a great
uh
cover, but just don't look at it closely.
I absolutely love when visual artists do stuff like this where it's just like they're really into it.
Yeah, and I don't, the author really has the author in traditional publishing, the author doesn't usually have that much input into the cover.
Hmm.
They'll choose somebody and they might say, here's two sketches. Um, do you happen to have a preference over which one? But they may or may not go with what you want. And they might ask you for things like, can you tell me what I've had sometimes people have said things like, well, can you tell me what era of dress we're looking at? The artist might ask that, right? But not always. Sometimes you just get something. And in the case of the second book, I just out of the blue, I got email one day and they said, oh, here's the almost final of the second cover. And I had no idea what they were going to do. I mean, I had heard nothing about it. And they do something with it, this thing that you have to look carefully to see that I was just really pleased by it. Yeah. So I feel very fortunate.
Now I'm extra excited for November
Yeah.
when it comes out. Um, so part of this world that you introduce right off is the pall and the
Hmm.
the little outbreaks of this. Do you call it spore? Is that what it
I
is?
call it spore. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is, without giving anything away, what is the pall and the spore doing to this world?
Uh, my friend Emma Candon, who has a Star Wars novel and her debut novel out, is part of my writers group, and she said, "Oh, it's a ravenous fungal ghost plague," which I love. Um, so the basic idea is you had this empire that was growing like empires do, and then I would have to look at my notebook, which tells me the exact dates of everything. Um, and about 150 years into it, all of a sudden, in like low-lying hollows and places, this kind of white mist started just arising, and it created these almost, imagine if you came across a lake, but instead of having water in it, it would have this white mist. And then if you touched it, it would cause your entire body to transform as it kind of devoured you alive. Have you ever seen slow motions of fungus getting into things?
No.
And oh, it's creepy. It's creepy because they're just like, oh, look, food. We can eat this stuff and grow our huge network. Um, yeah, it's like they're like ruthless little things. So I'm not even quite sure where it comes from, but I just had this idea in my head, and then the spore is like outbreaks of it that it might pop up in various places. So so it's very dangerous. So what it means is that society is now in a situation where day-to-day life can go on, but suddenly there might be an outbreak in some village, and within, 8 hours, every living thing inside that village is consumed. So one of the things that's happened in this society, that because it's an empire, kind of a very top-down, um, controlled empire, can do is they've created all these ways to these, I'll call them checks and balances. But like every, villages have a ditch dug around them, with water in it. That's like at the lowest level. If you can't do anything else, you can dig a ditch around your village and fill it with water, because then at least if spore outbreak is outside the village, it can't cross the water, right? But if it's inside the village, well, you're kind of screwed. And then there's different layers. There's a kind of wood that kind of, um, that it can't dig into. I mean, it can't dig into dead things.
Mhm.
Like if it lands on your clothes, it can't dig through them to get to your arms. So, and then, different, there's a kind of stone that repels it. And they have these roads, the witch roads, where if that it can't, it's the pall like doesn't go up to it. So like if you had the roadway, these are kind of like my obsession with Roman roads. If you have the roadway, the pall will come up this close to it, but no closer. So it's a safe path to walk on. And then you have the whole business of hierarchy, right? Who gets to walk on those roads? Who has passage on those roads? Who gets to stay in the safest towns that are surrounded by holy stone, in probably, in the palace, we might imagine that all the walkways are paved with holy stone, even though it's very expensive, because then nobody ever has to walk anywhere where spore could land. So the poorest and most vulnerable people are most at risk. And the wealthier and better connected you are, the less you're at risk. But everybody is still at risk. So now the whole society is kind of always got its eye open about how, about this threat. And it's an existential threat that has nothing to do with faction politics or invasions or civil war, intrigue, none of that. It's just this thing.
And out of this thing, there are jobs that seem to be created specifically for this. Um,
Yeah,
so that's an interesting like tidbit. If this was happening, you would want someone mapping the contours of it, or um,
right, right. So you would, I mean, every I think most empires they like to have maps of,
Yeah.
as they conquer things and to know where things are. But now we have a whole thing where people have to go out constantly. And there's an order, the Imperial Order of Surveyors, and they're like kind of like, they're kind of like rangers. They go out into the wilderness and they think, oh, wait, there used to be a little, on this map it says there was a little puddle of spore here, but it's gone now. And, there's a few sprouts coming up. So what happened to that? Or, oh, look, there's a thread of like a stream of spore going down this area where there wasn't before. What's up with that? And then, yeah, and then you have the road system where of course, it's quite disruptive to trade and to movements of people in the empire because you'll have these long lakes or strips or like straits of Paul that you can only pass because there's witch roads going through there. There were these roads going through there. So then you have this whole mechanism by which if you cross, you have to go through this checkpoint. And of course, if you cross on the road, you can't get spore on you anyway because it can't get on the road. But the checkpoint then allows the empire to have an excuse to know where everybody is, see your identification card, check what's in the manifest if you're a merchant, right? Go through all your stuff. So it gives them a chance to know what's going on at a really deep level. So it's also a means of control. So in a way, the empire is using this as a means of control.
Yeah, I
So
would.
there's a lot of layers to it. Yeah.
The Empire does seem very controlling, and at first I was like, well, of course they'd have to be. You don't want the spore to spread. And then as the story goes on, Ellen makes it very obvious that it is kind of a lot to deal with, because she is a person who wants to be free. She wants to be out and about. So I didn't realize that at the beginning how suffocating that must feel like, you know?
So as you know, the book two is called The Nameless Land, which because you've read book one, you have an idea of where we might be headed, right?
Yes.
And without saying more, one of the other things I like exploring is that kind of contradiction between the empire being very controlling, because it is. It is kind of an oppressive top-down regime. And on the other hand, some of the ways they found to patrol for spore and kill spore and make sure that there's as minimal amount of risk to life as possible also means that in other ways it's a safer place to live.
Hmm.
So I like that because I don't have an answer to those things.
Oh gosh.
I'm not like, you know, life is complicated. And so, yeah, but that gets delved into more in book two.
Wonderful, wonderful. Um, you said you had a very large cast of, well, it's not very large, but you have a cast of characters. And one of the most interesting is probably Kem to me. He is he's so brand new to everything and he's just so excited all the time. Was he a good way to kind of introduce the reader to things that we might not get an explanation of?
Yeah, I think that young characters or people who are in a place for a first time
Mhm.
characters are great for that in a book. I also wanted Elle to have relationships. I don't know so much today, but science fiction fantasy has often, not often, but there's a kind of a trope in SF&F of the orphan, right? Because then you don't have to deal with all those pesky familial relationships. But I like pesky familial relationships, whether it be blood family or found family, I don't care. I like relationships. To me, they deepen people and they give people better complications. So I knew I wanted her to have someone who she really cared about. And then with the other thing I wanted to do with Kim, I'm a parent and my kids are adults now, they're not kids, but I wanted to write a teenager who felt like a teenager, who didn't feel like, I'm going to write, I don't, there's a lot of great YA literature out there now, but there is some of it does feel to me that the people really are acting, they act like they're in their 20s or
Yeah.
even into their 30s, but they're 16. And I just don't, it doesn't work for me. I like teenagers who feel like teenagers, which means they're smart and capable. And also maybe they don't know as much as they think, or they get mad about. I mean, there's that scene where he confronts her. This is
Yeah.
not a spoiler. I'm going to be very vague. He's like, they're walking along. He's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do there? Blah, blah, blah. And she goes, oh, you're right. You're right. And he goes, oh, I hate you. And then, like every teenager who is so mad and righteously mad, but also it's like like mom or dad or my aunt, right? So then he keeps stumping along next to her, right? Oh, mad at you, I hate you, but he doesn't walk away. And to me is that's such a, that to me is the essence of teenagers, at least from me raising them. They love you, but they're trying to become themselves,
Mhm.
and they have to do that push pull. Um, so
The
I poured all my parenting experiences, parenting experiences into writing Chem. I love Chem.
I think the most relatable is when Kem sees something really cool and wants to turn to Elle
Oh
and
yeah,
look and share it, and then remembers he's mad.
yeah.
No,
Oh,
never
mad at
mind.
her. Oh, got there. Yeah, yeah. Gotta be mad. Gotta be mad. Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I really, yeah, there's, yeah, I just want to say I also love Chem.
So pretty quickly we find out that the world allows you to declare yourself. And I thought that was an interesting thing to add because Kem is just who Kem is. I didn't expect Kem to have been trans in any way, and is never then again treated as trans. So I was like, oh, perfect. Now, like there is a society that accepts Kem as Kem, but there is a tension with another group of people.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to do with the empire is that I wanted it to be a society that's very hierarchical,
Mhm.
but that one of the hierarchies is not gender.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to use the terms prince and princess. I just wanted to use the term prince. I didn't want to make up a term
Mhm.
that people would have to learn. I just didn't feel like it. Because and so that meant that a prince could be male or female.
Mhm.
And I don't know that this is a world where there's a particular, not, well, at least not among not in the empire. I don't think there's a particular consciousness of the concept of non-binary. And
Mhm.
my argument to myself at the time I was thinking all this through was that that would be because you weren't boxed in,
Mhm.
that no one is boxed in. So it's just understood that sometimes people say, oh yeah, and by the way,
Yeah.
you know, and they, and it's up to the individual, not to others, to make that determination. And even the Prince Skevelun, who is a arrogant, high-ranking person, a man who's just, who walks on top of, whatever. What Chem, it's like when we're in that one situation, it's just the one situation, right? It doesn't go, as you said, it
Yeah.
doesn't, once that situation is resolved, at least in this book, um, uh, we don't deal with Chem's gender or with Chem being trans at all.
Mhm.
It's just whatever, right? Everyone just, but the prince is just like, okay. He, the prince never asks for like, he's a boy. He said he's a boy. He's a boy.
Yeah.
He doesn't even say it. It's just, he just does it. And that was this, yeah. So, and it's what's funny to me about that whole thing is that when I wrote those opening couple chapters, and it's like, here's Ellen, and she's with her nephew, Cam. He's a boy. And I got like, I didn't even get into the second. I don't even know if I was in the second chapter yet. And I'm talking about the very earliest stage of writing. And I thought, it just all of a sudden in my head, it popped in. It's like, oh, Kim's trans. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't like sit down and say, oh, I'm going to have a trans character. It just, Kim is trans. That's just how it is. And it was something I knew about him right away. And then there is a plot point related to that, which I don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
You have to read that to find out. But it has nothing to do, it's a political plot point,
Yeah.
as it were, right? And it also shows something that is matters to me as someone who thinks about politics, which is that you can have an empire, but it doesn't mean that everybody in the empire has exactly the same views on everything.
Hmm.
So out in the provinces, they have these other ways that they're, holding to, whereas in the heartland, they will kind of be more like what the palace says. But then it also allowed me to have an emperor who could be male or female, a princes who can be male or female. And so all these titles could be either because gender isn't what's important there.
Right. It's important about how can the empire use you?
Yes, exactly. Which is why the other thing you can declare is what profession you want. You have one option at 17 to say, oh, I come from a line of shoemakers, but really I'd like to go apprentice to the blacksmith if they'll take me. And
Yeah.
everyone has that one chance to, do something. And there's limitations on that too, right? It
Yeah.
can't just be anything. Um, but the other thing about the hierarchy, and is something that's explored. Oh, this is the tough part, because now there's stuff that I can't remember if it's only discussed in book 2 and not book 1. But it can be as simple as who you have a love affair with may be complicated by the fact of what your respective
Yeah.
statuses are.
You
Yeah,
do get
listen.
into it in book one, so
Okay, all right. Okay.
um so there's so much world building that's happening here, but you never really lose focus of the story that's driving them. So Elle is on a very particular journey. She's trying to keep people safe. She wants to keep herself safe. Did you always want to tell Elle's story in a flashbacky kind of way?
You mean, are you talking about the second to last chapter?
Well, I mean, even before that, we don't really find anything out about Elle until at least half-ish way, maybe a little bit sooner, but you keep
There's
stuff pretty
some
close.
I do keep stuff pretty close, which reflects also the conflict that
Yeah.
develops between her and Kem, right?
Yeah.
There is the first time you get a hint of it is when she's been told that she's going to go escort the prince, and she goes to the bathhouse, which is like in many societies, people didn't have bathrooms, right? So you would have a community bathhouse where you would go, however, once a week or whatever, to take a bath and get clean. You see that in East Asia, Japan has that. Europe used to have it in the Middle Ages. Um, and so that's the first hint where she kind of slides back into that memory
Mhm.
briefly, right? But then she kind of jolts out of it. But that's also a reflection of her.
Yeah.
She's just like, you know what? It's in the past. I'm not going there anymore. And it's also a reflection of, and this isn't a spoiler, that her sister, who was killed about 2 years earlier in a just an accident, has nothing to do with anything, just a, you know, bad luck to be in the path of an avalanche. And that's not a spoiler because it's mentioned right away. Um, but so it's also a way to show that she has closed off that part of herself so that you get hints of it, but it isn't until the end of book one that she finally realizes that, well, anyway, I don't want to say more because actually I think, yeah. So that was a conscious decision to do it like that.
Okay. I,
Yeah.
I always find the release of information like that so difficult to figure out how you choose where to put it because some stuff just naturally falls out with like the stuff with Kem and the background between Kem's family, like father and
Yeah. Yeah.
background. But then there's other stuff that like, oh, I was like, I wonder why it's here. And then a few chapters later, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense to have been there. But do you struggle with that ever, placement of those things?
I think always. I
Okay.
think one of the hardest things, I think one of the hardest things as a writer is challenging oneself to get the right information at the right time with the right amount so that it's not too much for the reader to take in and not too little to give them a sense of investment in the story. And it's taken me years to learn, and I'm still learning how to do it. So, like Crown of Stars, which is a great, sprawling, chunky, absolute unit of an epic, right? And it's a lot. And I wrote it 20 years ago or more. Um, but it's a fantastic, huge epic fantasy stories, and there is a little too much information in it. So if I were to write it now, I would know where to trim.
Mhm,
So sometimes I'll give information to the reader in Crown of Stars that you don't really need yet.
mhm.
Because I hadn't, I just was, we're all still learning constantly. So to some extent in the Witch Roads, just all my 30 years of writing went into saying, I think this is the right place to put this. I think this is the right place to put this. Was I right every time? Maybe not. Or maybe I was. Who knows? Maybe I was right sometimes. And maybe there's one place where I could have put something different somewhere else. I don't know. But that's the great thing about writing is that every book is a chance to like take what you learned from everything else you've written and do something a little better.
Do you find you can adjust those things in revisions and with like feedback from other people?
I love revising. I used to way back in the day. I used to love the first draft, and revising was really intimidating to me because in large part because I didn't know what to do. But now I know what to do. So the first draft, and I'm not one of those people who writes like a really perfect first draft. I'm like a masher and like hacking through the jungle with machete kind of first draft writer now. And I'll be like I'll be writing and going, oh my God, this is terrible. No, I gotta stop. I gotta fix it. Whatever, something's wrong. It's like, no, just keep going. You'll fix it when you revise, right? Or you'll figure out something four chapters down the line that'll go, oh, okay, now I know how to fix that. So I do a lot of revising, and some of it is just me knowing. So the book I'm working on right now, I'm about, I don't know, we'll say three-quarters done with it. And there's some stuff I already know I need to fix, but I'm leaving it for now. And so before I turn it in, I'll fix those things. Other stuff, the writing group or my editor will say, in fact, one of the things that I need to fix in the book is that someone in my writing group said, hey, this thing here, I think it needs to go on a little longer. And I'm like, oh yeah, she's right, right. And then my editor will have comments that will be things I hadn't thought about or ways I didn't look at it. So I am like a combination of experience and feedback work for me to help me revise things to be as good as I can make it at the time. That's all I ask for is that I can write the best book I'm capable of on, at the time I'm working on it. And then 10 years later, I might look back on it and say, oh, I know how to fix that now, or this thing didn't work so well. But at the time, it was the absolute best I could do.
I don't think young writers I think when you're first starting out as a writer, you're very self-conscious. Um,
Yeah.
and then too much feedback is sometimes too bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I love hearing that like you still do these things, you still take feedback from people, and it was a process to learn how to revise. Um,
I I mean, to me, half of the joy of writing is literally that we're constantly learning and that I can keep getting better. If I was if there was like some place I was going to, oh, you're going to get to level 5 and then you're done with the game. It would be like, oh, okay, now everything I'm going to write is going to be at the same level. There's no that just doesn't interest me. And I think for people who are kind of constantly striving, art is a fantastic field because there's always something new you can do. There's always something you can learn from just experience or from listening or watching something else. Um, or from, reading a history book or whatever, anything. And then there may be some personalities who kind of want to, it's like, I want to get to level 5 and be done with the game, get that part of the game and then just write, at that level. There might be some people like that. I'm definitely not one of them. I like the journey. It's great.
I always tell people I read to learn things, and they're like, "But you read fiction a lot." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm learning
Yeah.
things. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways of learning. Sometimes it's just looking at something through a different person's eyes. Sometimes it's like an interesting fact. Sometimes I mean, it could be anything. The
I mean,
world
if
is
it is
kind
a
of amazing, you know.
if it's a fiction book, double check the fact, but like
Yeah, 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 because we've all been to that. It was like many years ago. So I have a science fiction series called The Novels of the Juran, the J-R-A-N, and written quite a while ago. It's one of my earliest series, although I still love it. But oh man, the worst burn though ever. So my beloved dad, who passed in 2013, he read up until he died. He read everything I wrote. But the biggest burn I ever got was on, I don't know which one of those books. So it's it's one of those things where you have people from space come down to a low-tech planet,
Mhm.
and then there's a lot of stuff, and then 4 books happen. Um, But he goes, after he read one of the books, he goes, well, the oxen were harnessed incorrectly. Who would know, right? But he was born at a time where he probably hitched up some oxen to wagons. I don't know. But I was like, oh no, it's too horrible.
And it's published already. It's not like you're gonna get to go back.
I mean, with ebooks, you can change stuff. And I guess if stuff goes into a true other printing, like a
Oh yeah.
true second printing, as opposed to there's a difference between like it got printed again for the 4th time, but that's just the same thing. But sometimes they'll do a true reprinting where you can go in and say, hey, could you change something? But I just, you know what? But to me, partly, I don't mind leaving something like that in as
Right.
kind of a marker of, I blew it. Sometimes we make mistakes, and that's just part of the process. So, oh
I
well.
I imagine it's a lovely reminder of your dad as well. Like you can
It
just look at
is
that book.
it is a lovely reminder of my dad too. Yeah.
So kind of circling back around to the Witch Roads, part of my favorite, like one of my favorite parts of the books is the stories that go along with what the Witch Roads is, how they started. Um, did you always have an interest in like folklore or like telling these histories? Because it seems like there's a lot of different types of folklore in these books.
Yeah, I do. I'm one of those people who's like weirdly obsessed with road systems. So that for one thing. I love all of my books have either road systems or transportation systems in it that play some part in the plot, or almost all of them. But But when I was in college and then post-college, I read a lot about folklore and about ways that folklore developed, patterns of folklore, different kinds of folklore, ways that people tell different stories about things. You know, if they don't really know, they come up with an answer and it might have parts of the truth in it because, and ways in which folk memory can hold on for a really long time to something that is what happened, but it's been kind of altered through time. I just, I think these aspects of culture are really interesting. But yeah, I did read a lot of folklore when I was, and a lot of like theory of folklore when I was younger.
One of the things I studied in school was folklore, so I'm always
Yeah.
happy to see people incorporate the way storytelling evolves. Um, so
I think again, to come back to that thing I said early on, is that we live in a society that tends to hierarchize certain kinds of things. Um, but folk knowledge is is a crucial way that people have survived over generations and centuries and millennia. They, I read a book some years ago. It was a collection, a related collection of short stories set in an archipelago by a very well-regarded author. And it opens with, so the archipelago could have been, it's all a secondary world, so it's not our world. But the archipelago was clearly framed to be something like it might have been the Seychelles or the Caribbean or even Hawaii or whatever, right? It was like an exotic place elsewhere. And then a a scholar comes from what's framed as kind of the West, right? To study the winds in this peculiar, the way the winds work in this archipelago of islands. And it's like, they're like, I'm coming to study the winds. And then, so the first thing she did was she talked to the local fishermen, but all they had were these crazy stories. So she went on to whatever. And I closed the book
yeah,
because I live in Hawaii and I'm telling you, do you know who understands about the currents, the winds, and how things work if you're like, paddling a canoe offshore? The locals do. And it's not that scholars can't come in and figure it out, but you talk to the locals because they're out in that water all the time. They know it. So that has also influenced me this idea that folk knowledge contains a lot of important information, as it does in the Witch Roads, when that old man from that tiny little impoverished village tells her a story about something that happened in his grandfather's time that it turns out that sounds implausible, but it turns out is probably what really happened.
but nobody will believe you ever.
Well, nobody will believe you ever. What do you mean that he walked in and walked out a different person? Oh, ha ha. These credulous, these credulous villagers, right?
I do
So,
love that Ellen plays the, I don't want to say ethnographer or whatever, but she gets in with people in every village that they visit to get information about the journey ahead that the rest of the prince's party would never
yeah,
get.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, that's all. All stuff that I wanted to do to show again, to show all these layers. They're outsiders, so they're really relying on, when the captain says to her, Captain Simo says to her, "Where's your map? I want to see your map." And she goes, "I don't have a map. It's all in my head."
right.
Her map is in her head, but it's also her map is the relationship she has with the people on her route who've known her for 10 years.
I do love, so all of this just populates the world in such a beautiful way. And I think you're such a wonderful world builder here.
Oh, thank you.
Does
World building is my favorite thing.
Does it ever seem like too much still or too little? Do you ever dial it up or dial it back in places?
Well, I would say that I've had the privilege of writing many different series, and the series take different tones. I don't, you know, you can, there's the trilogy that's the funniest one, and there's the one that's the heaviest one, and uh, I would say that world building plays a major part in everything, and that some have way more and some have a little less, but none of them have a lot less. They it that probably the least world building any of my works. Well, I did write two novellas, so that's limited by space, right? You only have so much space in 40,000 words to build a world, so it has to be very focused and targeted. Um, so I would say my two novellas, in some ways, have the least simply because they're short. And then I did write a young adult trilogy where it's, I would say it's pretty well world built, but I had to trim it down a lot because YA, you can't have a lot of descriptive passages. You have to cut it down. It's like, oh, we love this description of the marketplace, but can you just give us three, this 2-page description of the marketplace as they go through, but now make it 2 sentences. Like, all right. So you learn a lot from that, though, also. Okay, which 2 sentences do I need? What do I need most to know about this marketplace? One sentence might be something that would relate to the character's dilemma that they see, oh, and she saw that green jacket, oh, just like the one he'd worn when he dumped her, and then the other one might be something that relates to the political situation. She saw, uh, the now there were more of anyway, so yeah, so okay, I've got to have these two things because that's what matters most about them in the market, and it makes you think about pulling it in as opposed to saying, oh, I'm just going to write 5 pages of description of this market, we're just going to revel in it. And some readers love that, and other readers will be like, is anything happening? Can I, oh, okay, something started finally. So I've kind of done it all, but I can't say I've ever written a book with stripped down world building in it. That's not my vibe.
I imagine it would be difficult too because you write these fantastical worlds, that things might not be similar here. So,
For me, it's because I can't take the characters out of the world, and I can't take the world
oh.
away from the characters. That it's the same way, I say this all the time, in the same way that you and I and anyone listening to this is who we are and how we understand the world and how we interact with the world is due to our upbringing, our expectations, our assumptions, what we know, what we don't know, any prejudices we might have, any goals we might have, which are often, our maybe the education we've been allowed to get, how much money we have, color of our skin, our ethnic or religious background. All of these things play a part in who we are and how we get to interact with the world and the ways in which we assume the world is going to react to us. And if that's true for us, then for me as a writer, I need it and want it to be true for the people in my books. And that's why I need a world to put people in. If the world is kind of hazy or just very shallow, then they're really just that I just that doesn't work for me as a reader because then I feel like they're just some random suburban American plopped into this with those expectations, which is fine. Some people, that's fine. For some people like to read that, and that's fine. I mean, I'm genuinely not being judgmental here, but for me, it isn't. So that's why I can't write that way. I need that world and that character to have some similar assumptions to that you can see how the two are bound together. And that's one reason that my world building, that I get so into it, because it informs the characters. And I want the reader to reach a point in a book where there's a point in the fourth Geron book, and I'm not going to explain it, but where a character that you've gotten to know in books 2 and 3 has an encounter with somebody, with something very important. And because you've gotten to know that character and their view of the world, there's a moment. It happened to me actually as the writer. I had had a different expectation for what would happen when this encounter happened. But when it happened, everything about this character hit that point, and I basically said, "Oh shit." And then this thing happened that was, it turned out was, it had to happen that way because of what he brought to the situation, which
Yeah.
I had set up. And that's always my goal. I want people to see the characters as people who are a product of their place and that they make decisions based on who they are and how they see the world. Um, and if I get that right, if I get right so that the reader says, "Oh no," she's going to walk into the room and she's going to see someone from, this clan who 20 years ago, uh, so that the reader can anticipate, so that the reader also gets it. And if the reader gets it, then I'm happy. That the reader is getting all the things that they're getting because they now understand the world well enough. That's what really excites me. Yeah. If I can do that, then I'm like, yes, I did it. I did it right.
Are you working on anything new going? Well, you already said you were,
I,
but
I am always working. I'm always working on something new. So I have an unfinished trilogy, the gender swapped Alexander the Great in space. So the first two books are out. There was a delay with book three. It's just a very complicated book to write. So I'm about halfway done with that. Um, it's it's a great series. It's just very long and complicated, cast of millions or whatever. I don't know. So many plot lines. Um, and then I'm also working on another book that hasn't been announced yet, but it might possibly be set in the same universe as The Witch Roads. And it might be adjacent, like a spin-off. And I'm about three-quarters done with that.
ooh,
So
exciting.
yeah, it's a very different. Yeah, I can't say anything more yet, but hopefully soon. I think yeah, I'm trying not. This is like, I guess it's the soft launch, right, of the announcement. But yeah, more will come probably after Witch Roads is published, maybe.
Yeah.
Talk about it more. Yeah.
So we do get The Witch Road right now, though. And The Nameless
Yeah.
Land comes out in November.
Yeah. So the Witch Roads on June 10th, Nameless Land, I think November 3rd or 4th.
Okay.
So really close together. You don't have to wait that long. And it is a complete duology. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It isn't like, okay, this is just another to go on, whatever. It's a complete story.
Well, perfect. Now I'm incredibly excited that I don't have to wait 2 years for the next one.
Exactly. And I'm incredibly excited that I don't have to be working on the follow-up, feeling like the hammers are, on me, right? It's like already done. I've done the proofs. It's out of my hands. And check out the cover.
Oh, I'm so
Check
excited.
out, and then email me. Or are you on Blue Sky?
I do not have a blue sky, no, but
Oh, okay.
I can email.
Anyway, yeah. Or said, yeah, because it is really cool. And I can't believe it took me three times to notice it.
Oh, that's perfect though, subtlety.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, and the dog's now barking.
Well,
I don't know if you can hear him. He's downstairs.
that's okay because we have come to the end of the interview anyway. So thank you so much for being here, Kate.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dakota. I mean, I really appreciate it. It's been fabulous. And it's been fun to talk about the book in such depth. Um, so thank you.
And for everybody out there who's watching, Please, please go pick up The Witch Roads. It is very, very interesting and emotional, but in a good
Yeah.
way, not always in a bad way.
I decided I coined a term which made my eldest child mock me, but I said, I'm going to call this grim sweet.
I
I
love
know, right? Right?
Now I'm gonna have it's Grim Sweet now. So
It's grim sweet. Yeah. Grim world, sweet relationships.
okay. Well, thank you again for being here,
Thank you.
and I hope everybody out there has a wonderful night. Bye.